Good morning, students, colleagues, and guests. Welcome to our 12th talk in our lecture series by Neal Schoof and his team at Insight Landscape Architects. I'm Ludwig Hansen, and together with Kiki Doorman, we oversee the honours program here at BAS School of Architecture and Planning, of which this lecture series forms part. The lectures to date have given us insight on the spatial design methodologies and approaches towards spatial challenges and solving problems in our built environment. The talks have provided a fantastic insight through projects, conceptual ideas, and working methodologies, how changes in our architecture, cities, and the broader landscapes can be re-evaluated and improved. The speakers have all demonstrated an understanding of the processes towards achieving spatial design excellence, which has been insightful, inspirational, and instructive to our students and peers alike. Today's discussion will inform from an environmental and landscape perspective, which I'm sure will further expand our understanding of an integrated approach to design. Before I introduce Neal, some announcements. Again, the lecture series is accredited with CPD points, and it will be displayed after the lecture's completion. The password and registration links that you require. This will be available until 12 o'clock, or the registration at least is available until 12 o'clock this afternoon. Also, please ensure that your microphones are switched off or muted and your cameras are switched off. In introducing Neal Schoof, together with his team at Insight, which is a company based in Pretoria and probably represents the largest landscape architectural practice in South Africa, with nearly 20 years of experience in a vast array of projects, both locally and internationally. Their portfolio covers an incredible amount of projects, many of which are deemed as some of the most important interventions over the last two decades. And Neal's involvement stretches across corporate, retail, leisure, institutional, and urban scale interventions, resulting in him having a broad understanding of the role and impact of landscape architecture and its role within our built environment. Neal completed his degree in landscape architecture at the University of Pretoria, and after extensive travels abroad before he established Insight Landscape Architects. He has also since completed a Master's in Science in Environmental Planning, and is also currently the appointed landscape consultant advisor here at WITS. And he has always been willing to participate in lectures, seminars, and studio sessions with students here at the School of Architecture and Planning. His continuing involvement with WITS is greatly appreciated. We at WITS offer our gratitude and thanks to you, Neal, for sharing your thoughts and ideas in this lecture series, and looking forward to your talk. Over to you.
Great, thanks Ludwig. Thanks very much for the introduction, and good morning colleagues, good morning students. It really is a privilege for us to be able to showcase not only some of the work we've been doing, but also landscape architecture and how we actually work with spaces as landscape architects. So I'm not really just talking insight this morning, I'm also talking about landscape architects and really want to showcase the profession. So landscape architects look at the city in layers and the environment in layers. We like to unpack things from geology to climate. We always, like all built environment professionals, we designing for people and the environment, so we're quite focused on that. I thought this was a lovely image of how people congregate. You have your bystanders who like to sit and watch the catwalk, and then also you have people who like to group together and socialize. So I really thought that this showed a quite beautifully. And then COVID hit. I can tell you in early lockdown, we were having a few COVID nightmares of ourselves. What's our profession going to be doing in the future? Are we going to be putting out pads for people that they can social distance, even if it is an exterior environment? Is this what our latest project's going to look like? Or even this? So I think a lot of us learned during COVID about what we're actually doing, and I hope everyone reflected, and both on good and bad elements of their profession. So my presentation this morning is about current and completed projects, and we're going to start with the really large grain and then move down to the really intimate scale. Our approach to projects is really a landscape systems approach. We really want to do more than the aesthetic. We want to improve environment and ecosystems, improve people's lives, focus on stormwater on site. Often between ourselves and the engineers, we need to deal with it. And we have a love affair with stormwater. We need to have a love affair. And also landscapes to eat. So we're going to move from the big grain to the small grain and kick straight off into a project in Abidjan, in Côte d'Ivoire. And there's a lot of elements at play there, such as road hierarchy surrounding land uses and public space. So we're jumping up there quickly to the west coast of Africa. I wanted to highlight our project through just letting you know, and this is actually a tourism project. We're looking at instituting tourism infrastructure in a national park. On your bottom right-hand corner, you can see where Abidjan sits, and you see these hues of dark green. And particularly in Côte d'Ivoire, the problem is that these little pieces of dark green are the last remaining forests in the country, of which one little forest sits in not the capital, but the largest city, Abidjan. Yamoussoukro is the capital. And unfortunately, one can also understand why this happens. Cacao is easy to grow. You just need to plant it and it'll grow on its own, and people need an income. So unfortunately, it's wiped out a lot of the forests. I've used images from Africa Drawn, which show beautiful texture. This is the city of Abidjan. When starting to work on this project and talking about that larger grain, we looked at the 2030 plan for Côte d'Ivoire, or for Abidjan. And in the very center, you can see there's a little green spot that sits there, and it's pretty cut off. Yellow being city, red and orange, all the colors around it are kind of just eating it up. So in the center of the city, you can see that texture of the urbanization, and it's literally almost like a computer game that's really just swallowed up a piece of almost pristine rainforest. So our first approach in looking at that larger grain again was to really try and get Parc National de Banco on a tourism map. Start looking at other tourism activities within Abidjan and try to plug it in. And what will that be? So we completed a large-scale tourism plan intervention in the forest. We're very proud that OIPER, which is the Côte d'Ivoirian National Parks, has actually instituted this plan and included it in their future management plan for the park. And if I could just pause here and tell you, it was really a fine balance, because we need to conserve within the park, and you'll see images of the rainforest shortly. we really needed to conserve, but we also needed to provide a facility for Abidjan that public can go into the park and do more urban activities and not necessarily conservation activities. And we approached the park in terms of any new facilities that would be added to the park would have to be in already existing cleared areas. Our aim is not to actually touch a tree. So this is Abidjan, real densification, traffic, mixed-use buildings or ground floors. That's one thing that's quite beautiful in a lot of our high-density African cities, is they manage to get this balance right between a low-cost type mixed-use development in terms of shops on ground floor, even workshops, and then residential above. A lot of people needing an income living around the park. These are all just images from around the park, and in particular our future generation that are playing right on the doorstep of the park. And then what a privilege. When you leave that urbanization and you arrive in the park, the temperature drops by 3 degrees automatically, and the loud buzz of the city just disappears. So our management plan provides for the 2030 plan. We're looking at how the new light rail that they're putting in at the city or in Abidjan would be connected to our park. And we're also looking at how we can encourage tourists into the park. At the moment, the tourist numbers are very low, and we really want to get those numbers up. And it's, I think with many projects, it's got more to do than just creating infrastructure. It's about branding, getting the word out. We did a phasing plan of how we can attract more visitors to the park, that it generates an income and generates job opportunities for the community living on the periphery. We got intensely involved with the community. We saw the four chefs around the perimeter. It took me a little while, at least the first meeting, to understand that chef is a chief. So I was wondering who's cooking in the kitchen every time we went to a meeting, because it was chef, chef, chef. So we involved the local community. They've also protected this park. They've really, the park wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the community that was protecting the park as well. There is poaching, but we have 12 chimps still within the park. There is a chimp community within the park. It's 3,000 hectares. Sorry, I didn't mention that. It's 3,000 hectares. We have chimps in there, and a lot of small fauna as well. But again, a privilege. You're traveling, you're actually working. On the left-hand image, you can see me standing at the base of a tree. And on the right side, you can see a nameleur, which is the first time, that little black spot in the tree. It's a nocturnal animal. Gaboon viper. You see all sorts of exciting things while working, which is quite fun and passionate. This little guy is only found in Parc National de Banco. So, you know, we really do need to conserve the park, but also change perceptions of the park, that it can create jobs for the community and also be a facility for the city. Beautiful evening shot of the trees. And then we move to a slightly smaller scale, and that is to Mombasa in Kenya. We've been lucky enough to do a lot of work in East Africa. It's a fantastic part of the continent to work in. Probably been involved in East Africa since 2004 with the Tanzanian Parliament in the center of Tanzania, in a city called Dodoma. And and then moved on to also doing work in Kenya. So this is Mombasa Island. It was established in the 900s. So that's when the first communities started to settle on Mombasa Island, and that's pretty much the city center. It's the heart of the entire Mombasa. And don't forget that Mombasa is on the East African trade route with that had dhows sailing up and down the east coast of Africa, and this is one of the areas that they used to stop. And I'll refer to that in a moment. So in terms of our project, we were looking at connections, densification. Mombasa is a nice dense island already. Beautiful mixed use in the city as well. And our site itself needs many transport or mobility options. We wanted to include as many mobility options there that weren't in existence. Just very quickly, Mombasa Island is a little difficult to get onto in rush hour. The red dots are 2 bridges, which are the main access ways. There is a 3rd bridge, but it's only used by the military. The 2 blue dots on the lower left-hand side are actually ferry connections. Mombasa has the same constraints as what Maputo has had through the years. Maputo has now built a harbour across the bridge, and that lowest blue dot is actually also the entrance to the harbour. So Maputo so far, with I think at great expense, overcome using a ferry to connect to the city, but Mombasa still has to go through the motions if they ever do. The green dot is actually our site, which is approximately 2 kilometers long. That's just an aerial view of Mombasa and one of the connecting bridges. Getting back to transport, that's rush hour on one of the bridges into the city. It's tuk-tuks, it's trucks, it's buses, it's bicycles, and it's guys who make a living with wagons pushing produce from the outskirts of the city into the city. So a fantastic kaleidoscope of users. And also, quite importantly, a fair amount of respect for each road user. There's no organization here, but there is respect. So moving down to the site, that is the project. From left-hand side to right-hand side is a 2 kilometer stretch. And this is the only breakaway green space on Mombasa Island of any scale. So we approached the project with an understanding of the importance and what it means to the people of Mombasa. So we really wanted to work on it and give it our best attempt within budget, of course. And we worked in a consortium. We were working with an architecture firm based in Nairobi and also have an office in Mombasa called Planning Kenya, a great team. And then various professionals, engineers from Kenya, and then mobility engineers from Italy. There's only 3 gateways into this green space. Which unfortunately we could not change. They are fixed access ways. The rest of the land or the land uses surrounding are either private or institutional. The Aga Khan has a college fronting onto our property as well, or onto the project. And then that blue dot again is the Lakoni ferry, and we will start on that side of the project and slowly move to your right-hand side. There's the Lakoni ferry. Why I wanted to focus on this is even though there's already too many people to actually use the space gets packed. The Lakoni ferry was also a source of public who wanted to visit the project, experience Mama Ngina Park, and also provided relief for them as well. So I'm going to take you through the project quickly. Like I said, landscape architects work in layers. There's a few fundamental environmental items that we really needed to think about. One was the traffic. You have crazy tuk-tuk drivers. I believe a lot of them don't have licenses. I actually watched an accident happen between tuk-tuk drivers in front of me. They bumped into each other, they gave each other a look, and off they went again. So they're really like little bees throughout the city. And then also the trade winds. As I mentioned earlier, we have the trade winds in Mombasa. So we wanted to do a landscape that takes cognizance of those harsh environmental conditions. The wind really blows for 6 months from one direction and then changes to the other direction. Beautiful baobab trees in parts of the public space. We decided on a gateway to announce the entrance, a threshold to announce the entrance to this project. The theming was done by Planning Kenya, and they came up with a baobab theme, because this is actually at that baobab area. And I just wanted to show you that sculptural scaffolding that was put up and shuttering for those horizontal concrete discs. So that's almost the same picture that you saw earlier. This is now a bit later with the gateways constructed. Important to note that there's actually a tabletop crossing at that threshold. We're trying to slow traffic down. We also, with the traffic engineers, workshopped narrowing the road so that we could actually again slow traffic down. As many know, narrowing does result in slowing down traffic, and we really wanted to achieve that. We actually made the parking bays a bit deeper, so and then which you'll see shortly, and then narrowed the road as well, and tabletop crossings to slow traffic. So this is a progress shot of some of the large public spaces that we designed at Mama Ngina Drive. There's an amphitheater at the top left-hand side, which was designed by the architects. And behind that, the red roofs, is the Aga Khan Academy. And then as you move down on the left-hand side, that is our presidential square. Unfortunately, but from a climate point of view, it's used for military parades. There were existing trees there that we strapped ourselves onto and cried, but no, the trees had to go. And then on the right-hand side, you will see a red roof building, which is a new build. It's a cultural center, so it's bringing that beautiful significance of culture into the space, which we pulled through. The patterning that you see there is what we based on a Swahili cultural pattern, so we brought that cultural aspect into the landscape as well. And just to the left hand, just above that red roof building, the Kilindili Cultural Center, is a mosque. We had to take cognizance of the mosque's requirements as well. And that meant that we unfortunately could still not plant the trees that we wanted to plant. And by the way, nothing makes us more happy than to be able to snag projects with Google Earth. That's just the presidential square under construction. It was, yeah, it's an amazing experience. You're working on a really important project in Kenya. It attracted national news all the time. And it also being the entrance to the harbor, you'd see Ships go by, dredges go by, and snag at the same time. This was actually the opening by the president last year, President Uhuru Kenyatta, and the military parade taking place on that same square. You can see our palm trees in the background, which we planted. We planted 200 larger sized coconut palms, and it's really one of my most admired plants. It can take the trade winds fantastically. It can survive in the worst saline conditions. In fact, I've seen coconut trees actually sprouting where the seed is sitting just above the high water mark. And most importantly, for everyone there in Mombasa, and also for the hawkers or the traders, they actually have coconuts that they cut and harvest and eat and sell at that park. So that really means that in the future, the street sellers have a plant that they can harvest from continuously, and we really wanted to give that to them. It's an image of the presidential square. This was Sunday. I don't know quite what happened to social distancing. This was the past Sunday. A huge concert was held on the presidential square, and this is the first time that I was really not so upset about losing all those trees. I think that the space provided a fantastic mixed-use, multi-use space for the city. You can also, below the ship, you can see the Kilindini Cultural Center, and to the right of that, you can see a pigeon tower, which is again a Swahili-themed element, and that element acts as a landmark and repeats through the space along Mamangina Drive. This is under construction. We learnt a few lessons. Often our paving would arrive just in heaps. All the way from Simba pavers in Nairobi, and the road from Nairobi to Mombasa has a few bumps in it. So from a snagging and a quality point of view, whilst it was under construction, it was a bit of a concern. That's the cultural center a few months ago. I just wanted to show this image. If you're not a student, you're already in the construction industry, and it is very exciting to see a building happen. So this is just a tiny little courtyard that we did within the Kilindini Cultural Center, but it's really quite beautiful just to see a building happen. Another under construction, completion. So again, thanks to Google Earth, we can snag and look at our project. So we wanted to connect the citizens of Mombasa to the sea. Before, there was no connection. There was just a number of parking lots. So we created a 2-kilometer long promenade, pretty much like Sea Point. Anyone that's walked along the promenade at Sea Point, that's really what we wanted to achieve. So to the right is actually the sea. Unfortunately, this image I know was taken at low tide because I know what it looks like there. And then one could walk along this promenade. You can see our palms, and you can also see some strip parking areas which we introduced. So this is a before shot. You can see the traders with their little stalls. You can see just this mix match of a large parking area. Nowhere for the pedestrian to really just amble and enjoy the breeze. This is the after image with the parking lots to the left and the promenade to the right. Unfortunately, this is now during COVID, this image, so there are actually people in Mombasa. And the parking lots actually serve two purposes. The one is cultural. The cultural purpose partly of the parking lots. And in East Africa, some of the citizens chew cut or mira. And so it was a specific client request. Our client was the Ministry of Tourism for Kenya. And it was a specific client request that we include the parking lots so that people can just sit in their cars and chew mira. It is hallucinogenic. And so they can sit there and think about life, catch the breeze. I'm going to go a little quicker because there's a few more projects I want to show you. So this was our site before construction. This was after construction and also nicely dressed up for the opening by the president. The middle gateway is a Swahili-styled gateway. We introduced Swahili-inspired patterning in our paving patterns throughout the project. And you can see the paving in the foreground in terms of a cultural pattern. Very proud, the president was actually there last week. That is President Uhuru Kenyatta. The park is named after his mom. So he has a close connection to the project and actually makes these amazing little cameo appearances. I don't know where the bodyguards were. Just Mombasa quickly. Interestingly enough, it's the first city that I've visited on the African continent where the governor or the president, probably governor of Mombasa County decided that all buildings must be painted blue and white. So as a tourist and the whole space syntax theory, I'm not quite convinced. You do lose a bit of a legibility element to the city. But yeah, if any of you have visited Mombasa or going to visit Mombasa, it's just blue and white all over. Also, just as an aside, it's when I visit Mombasa, just next to these street sellers, there's a street seller where I buy my chapati. Chapati is almost like a pancake or a roti. And I always stop at the same little street seller. She has a little pot with her chapati in it, and it's great to actually just experience a bit more. University of Pretoria, Earthworld Architects, we worked with them on this project, and the project, from a landscape point of view, we really focused on what can you eat. Again, from my introduction, you would have seen that we really want to add value to landscape. So it was quite important. We created an almost indigenous garden and really focused on what can be harvested and used in the kitchen at the premises, which I think is a fantastic step in the right direction. And obviously, it's difficult to complete a meal there. We didn't have any mammals running around or chickens, but it was really a great opportunity to add another layer to the landscape and really introduce people to our rich botanical history. This project itself is focused on post-grad students from around the continent. So this is under construction. This image courtesy of Earthworld. And this is the completed project. That water body in front we use for irrigation. That's where we pump our irrigation from. We collect stormwater from around the property, channel it there, and then reuse it in our irrigation system. I wanted to touch on landscape infrastructure at University of Pomalanga. We were lucky enough to be involved there for a number of years, and again, wonderful project, wonderful climate, different conditions, so we can have a bit of fun. one of the elements that I wanted to touch on here is landscape architects and planners and architects really to look at universal access. It is a very hilly site, and we started working with universal access all over the site, which wasn't there before. You would have needed a vehicle to traverse the contours, and introduced many steps and ramps all over the project so that one could actually move from residences to the eating hall if you were mobility impaired. So we really wanted that universal access all over. The first couple images I'll show you is just down to the finer grain of a ramp and stair system. We also, like all consultants, I know when Nina and Fiona gave their talk as well, we also started falling in love with modules. So if you just note the stairs on the project and how we actually worked with pavers and played with the very fine grain to bring those and had fun with those modules. We also, the blocks are existing residences that it was impossible to get to if you were challenged, completely impossible. And we're quite proud that we managed to create a link to all the existing residences, a suspended walkway link. SANS compliant, what we did here is we really stretched the landings because it was really impossible to change direction on the ramps. So we stretched the landings as much as possible to still provide good respite. We also introduced lighting and also to add that we based this on Ludwig Hansen's framework plan for the campus. It was envisaged that there would be a link here, and why I also want to highlight that is in discussions with Ludwig, we wanted it well lit. So we also introduced almost a kind of safe zone where you can walk from one side of the campus through this part of campus with downlights creating a very well lit path. So at night it becomes a nice safe path, and at the same time it's got that function of universal access. We had a lot of fun with water on the campus. This is an image of the lower campus. You can see the buildings around it from Ludwig's framework plan, his urban design framework plan. And we started looking at how can we catch some of that water on site in term and not let it actually just disappear off the site and really slow it down. And we started looking at what can we do in the 1 in 5 rain event. And just to add, all the consultants, just to add at the bottom of the page, all the consultants that were involved, we were very lucky. We had a good relationship with the civil engineers and basically ourselves, and to a degree, the civil engineers drove the process. So we looked at how can we capture the 1 in 5 and what happens on the project with the 1 in 5. So have a look at the sketch on the right-hand side. So this is how we were going to contain water on site. We created rain gardens that would collect water and channel them into different parts of the project that they actually stay in plant beds before they get channeled off the site. And one of the things that we learned in this process, which is quite amazing, is it's all about how we can size the pipes that are real first collection pipes are emitted, and our larger diameter pipes are rather used after the water has moved to the landscape. And then a 1 in 20-year rain event, and there are existing dams on the site, or small ponds or lakes. And when there was a huge rain event, we would look at using that water by just dispensing it into the lakes. Just in terms of how did we do it in one of the areas, we removed curbs. We allowed the water to flow from the road straight into a sunken plant bed. We worked on the volumes that we could really carry that water through the plant bed, allow a damming up of the water. And in terms of this specific section, it was really an area where we could then expel slowly water into the existing dam. The existing dam also has capacity to take stormwater as well. We worked on a capacity there. So this is the project. At the bottom of the screen, you can see our curb inlets, where we've removed curbs, so stormwater sheet flow can go straight into those plant beds. In this image, you can see rainwater gardens on the left-hand side, where we're collecting rainwater that's coming off the roadway. We also channeled it down these large planters that they also act as catchment areas for water. Also in this image, you can see a deck. We wanted to make these dams more accessible to the students. So previously these dams were surrounded by a Devil's Fork fence because of an accident that happened, a tragic accident that happened there a few years ago. So we replaced the Devil's Fork fence with a lower Clearview fence and started creating these beautiful pop-out spaces for students where we cantilever over the dam. These spaces, you know, with our institutional work, these spaces become spaces of synergy on the campus. Not all learning takes part in a lecture theatre, and I think that's one thing that Henry Comrie really accentuated in his talk on Monday. So we were looking at creating these breakout spaces. In the lower image, you can again see that runoff from the road going into the plant beds. These images are a year and a half old, so I'm looking forward to looking at it or visiting the site soon to see what it looks like. We also, from a mobility point of view, created this grand staircase that you can see moving through the screen. And this grand staircase has a stramp in it, or a ramp. So we provided for mobility that one can actually move down the ramp if you are in a wheelchair, and you'll see an image shortly. And we use different materials on this ramp and stair structure because, again, from the urban framework plan, this was a very important vista, and we wanted to accentuate that importance with changing materiality as well. And this vista looks towards Mbombela or Nelspruit in the south, and it is beautifully framed by Cohen and Garson's buildings either side of it. So I think it really is quite a fantastic and grand space to announce the university. That's the stramp. The contractor got it right, which was fantastic. It is an extremely difficult set out. I think that some of my landscape architects in my office were really not that happy with me because the set out was quite difficult. Sorry, also on that image, on the right-hand side, it was important for us to provide a able-bodied clear stairway. So you'll see on the right-hand side, there's a completely clear stairway with a handrail that you can use. So it really is quite nicely multifunctional, and we're quite proud of it. Soltplaatje University. This is Ludwig Hansen's urban framework plan. We were lucky enough to work on the project for a few years, and again we're looking at innovation from our side. What can we do differently on the project? When I say a few years, we were involved right from the start. The image on the right-hand side with the concrete truck is actually Middle Campus, where many buildings now stand. And on the right-hand side is the main square as it would develop, with a light beacon designed by Ludwig's office. So focusing on Middle Campus that we worked on, I'm going to take you from the top of the page through a few images down to the bottom of the page. Again, when I referred earlier to what can we do differently, the site is extremely flat, as you would have seen on the image. Not only is it extremely flat, but it's underlain by rock. So we had many stormwater challenges. So there was a bit of a love affair breakup at one stage, but we got it back together again and got stuck into how can we deal with stormwater on site. The blue dots are actually, again, soakaway gardens that we built. And yeah, it was really, Kimberley's arid, it's dry. Rainfall events are mainly storm events. And let's just keep that water on site and let it soak away. I'd also just like to highlight on this image that, again, as part of the framework plan, at the top of the page, you actually you're arriving from a different part of campus. And this line from the top of the page, and then that goes directly down the bottom of the page, is again a very important pedestrian spine that needed to be recognized. And we recognized it again through materiality. We were heavily involved in the lighting design, and we chose a specific fitting. Again, Ludwig spoke about it being a well-lit area, a safe zone that you can move through. So we brought that into our design, and we are quite happy with the result. Also, what's fantastic about the campus is that it's very integrated into the city. It's not a standalone element. I don't know if I should be ashamed, but I haven't visited the Northern Cape Legislature yet. Partly being preoccupied with Soltplaatje University on every site visit, but also it's not connected to the city, whereas Soltplaatje University is so beautifully integrated that it really is part of the city fabric. And Henry Comrie also touched on that earlier in the week. So if we start just at the top where the red dot is, that's an existing historical building, and we decided to create a North African courtyard. Again, the environment is quite harsh in the summers. So we planted over 100 deciduous trees in the space. It's not a big courtyard, and created as much shade as possible. And then again, created these informal breakout areas for the students where you can sit and gather in the shade. And just in the center of the image, you can see Henry Comrie's or Urba's building that he spoke about on Monday. And then you can also see the light poles and part of that really important lighting element that we took through there. So when you approach Urba's building, I wanted to just highlight with the zoom in that what was fantastic for us is the approach with the building meant that although the building edge actually sits against a tree line. We pulled the paving through, so the building became part of the street, and a beautiful shaded or pedestrian way, and a beautiful shaded area that, especially in summer, you could walk through and experience. So the building was just so connected and so integrated. That's one of the images looking now down towards the main square with the building on the right-hand side. And you can see the entrance to the building that becomes that street. We also created a lot of breakout areas against the facade of the building with lovely seating, trees, creating a space that the students could enjoy both in summer and in winter. And then you can see our lighting design, which leads you down to the square and forms that golden thread. Also important, again, from a mobility point of view, is for the visually impaired, we have a tactile paver, which is that white strip, which actually links the visually impaired all the way through. Another image with those breakout spaces. At the time, the university had bicycles for the students. One of the fantastic things about Kimberley, not really from a stormwater point of view, but that it is so flat. It is wonderful that you can really use a bicycle and move around campus. Moving to the main square. So that's one of our rain gardens on the main square. Our paving, we did the fall of the paving towards the rain garden so that we could collect that water. We also, just from a little cultural point of view, I think people think Kimberley and the big hole, but there's many more layers to it in terms of quite ancient historical elements in riverbeds around the city. But we brought that geology in. As I mentioned at the start of the talk, we brought geology into the space as well that became benches for the students. This is an early shot. I was lucky enough to be in Kimberley when they had a large rainstorm. So I just wanted to show you how that rain garden worked. It was blocked with a 2-liter Coke bottle, the outlet. It's because we let the water run out slowly. And but just to show you how our paving slopes worked and how we were able to collect that water. Also, a beautiful building done by Savage and Dodd, as well as Activate Architects, had a grand square within it. And the aggregate that you see there is actually the sub-layers of our rain garden. That's the completed rain garden. We've got stairs along the edge if students do want to sit on a stair rather than sit on a bench. They can do that. We did include benches. We included tree grids, as you can see, which actually reflected some of the design cues on that very first sculptural element that you saw on the main square. Benches, bins, lighting. We coordinated the lighting with bollard lighting in this space. Sasol is a corporate project that we did in Sandton, all on super basement with Paragon Architects. The client was Alchemy. And I just wanted to touch on this landscape. We did an environmental landscape that responded to the location within Gauteng, and then the orientation of the landscapes on the super basement in terms of sun and shade. That was under construction. I wanted to show you this image. There were water features on the building, and that's what it looked like when it was completed. Very importantly, we actually used the water plants on the right-hand side for reducing the solar heat buildup within the building on ground floor. There are meeting rooms behind that planting, and we actually worked with the engineers on that in just reducing that heat load within the building and rather using plants to do it. And the building was our beautiful giant rock outcrop. So all the landscapes we designed around it are indigenous and really responded to that sun-shade combination of planting. This is under construction, completed, under construction, completed. We have a lawnmower for the project because we have a little patch of lawn, which you can see on the right-hand side. That patch of lawn is for the visually impaired guard dogs. So the guard dogs get taken down to their toilets at that little patch of lawn. Just popping to Nairobi very quickly again, we had some fun a few years ago creating, again, a threshold to a new development. This development's just north of Nairobi. There has been a migration out of the city, and we created these 3 large threshold pylons for the project called Tatu City. That's a recent Google image. They're still there, so I'm very happy. And just to touch on Nairobi, as you all know, it's quite close to the equator. And so there's a very fine-grained design element. The pylons have wood timber slats on them, and we designed them along the face of the columns so that the sun and shade would soften and brighten that orange paint. That orange paint is a corporate color related to the project, and the shadow that would fall across it would really change the nuance and tone of that orange. And that was also related to the fact that at the equator, of course, the sun shines from both directions through the year. In South Africa, we're so used to finding a north on every plan. Here, you're looking at a north and a south. We imported lighting from South Africa to light our pylons. That also worked very successfully. We were very happy with that. When you're traveling, you see fun things. So I just wanted to touch on very quickly on just a few fun elements. These are some interesting sculptures at Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in Nairobi. In Kampala, I saw that Starbucks had really diversified in what they offer. I've had the opportunity to take a break from Mombasa and fly to Lamu, Kenya, and really experience that urban fabric of Lamu. Absolutely beautiful. Back in Kampala, seeing someone off to work in the morning on a boda. Back in Lamu, as you know, it's an island, so getting from the airport to the island itself requires water travel. That lovely grain at Lamu. In Abidjan, in Côte d'Ivoire, just seeing a beautiful gallery with beautiful mosaic works. Architecture that you haven't seen before in Abidjan. A family in Lagos on their way to school. You see the little boy in front and dad and the 2 kids on the back. Eating plantain in West Africa. And thank you very much for the opportunity. Like I say, I wanted to showcase our work, but really showcase our profession. And I hope that you found my talk interesting.
Thanks, Neal. Thank you very much for that contribution. I think it's astounding the width of work. and the variety that comes with it, as I stated in the introduction. And also the scale that you introduce to the work. I think it's also important for our students who are not necessarily introduced to landscape architecture or the importance of the in-between spaces sufficiently. And I think the last two talks with Urba and yourself are starting to highlight that, and I trust that the students will also bear fruit from that. I'm going to open up for a discussion. There is a hand up already, obviously a very anxious one. Emma, I think if you want to ask your question.
Thank you, Ludwig. Thank you, Neal, for this presentation. You've made me aware of a few aspects I could never have imagined needed consideration, especially the lawn area for the walking dogs, guide dogs. So I'm just thinking of a question that would be relevant for the students for their project they're working on. And as you went through your presentations, I've listed a few principles that you've mentioned. And I've also listed two questions in terms of the overall systems that affect your design to a great extent. So maybe the overall systems I'm referring to your climatic control and ecological systems in terms of how you consider biodiversity and the life you find around the buildings, the natural context. And then more human systems as well, the wayfinding and signage. So I'm just trying to put a package together for students to understand the extent of a landscape architect's brief, and especially at Solploiki, you've covered many of them. And then what I'm trying to get to is how you inform yourself with also the planting palettes, your general specifications, and the landscape elements you choose for a specific project. And then ultimately, for the architects to be aware how they can be more considerate towards landscapes and the surrounding environment when they're designing a building, when they're still in the process, and considering the future as well. So that's my question. Thank you.
Neal, I just want to point out you only have a couple of minutes to answer that question.
Give me an hour, come on. No, thanks very much for the question. Thank you. We've worked together, so yeah, I've enjoyed working with you. Just to start off with the botanical question, I do a lot of self-study, or our office does a lot of self-study for a planting response to a project. So one of the little tricks, bag of tricks, it's planting response for dummies, is when I land a project in a different city, I drive around the city and actually see what's working. Don't fix what's not broke. So we really start looking at what's existing. Then in terms of the climatic factors, I mean, obviously shading in most environments is just such a economical way to reduce environmental load, heat load, etc., in any spaces between buildings. So from an environmental control point of view, that's a factor. So we've got vernacular, if you could call it that, planting, and then looking at ways of controlling solar radiation. I think I've touched on the stormwater as well. And your very first question in terms of the systems. What makes things a little difficult for landscape architects is we create landscapes of uncertainty. We're never sure how those landscapes are going to completely 100% perform, because it moves over to the client. And how does the client maintain those landscapes when you're talking about the green as opposed to hard landscape elements? So landscapes of uncertainty in landscape urbanism. You know, one looks at the landscape as the starter, and what load is that landscape going to have to take when development happens around it. I hope that answers some of your questions.
Thank you. I don't wonder if there's another student or anybody else who has a question.
Thanks for moderating, Emma. Any other queries? Deadly silence. In the commercial project in Sandton, the build-up is and the structural requirements seem quite extensive. Can you maybe just elaborate on that a bit more, because it seems just also for our students, it's not just an application on top of a structure or a basement in this case, but seems to be quite an extensive structural intervention. Can you maybe just talk to that, Neal?
Yes, no, that's a good question, Ludwig. There was a lot of negotiation with the structural engineers on that podium slab, or that the building sits on. So with Paragon Architects and Steve Soteраlis, the structural engineer, we negotiated a lot with his office on the load that slab can carry. Obviously, the thicker the slab, the more expensive the slab. So what you don't see there is we did a lot of void former drawings for that podium slab, where we have planting on that slab. We actually have shallow soil. We have polystyrene void formers underneath it. And wherever there's a tree, we've punched a hole into those void formers so that we can have our tree and just enough space for it to develop. So yeah, a lot of negotiation on those loads. And the entire slab was covered with a no-fines concrete. We wanted to keep our planter walls that we designed and had built, our water features. We wanted to keep that all separate from the waterproofing and the main structural slab.
Okay. Also, maybe just on the same question or the same project, it's a huge footprint from my understanding. I don't know the project that well. And you're having to contain the water, the runoff that it produces on site. How does that work?
Yes, in this case, as with some of our other projects in Sandton, with these corporate head offices and almost mega blocks, if you want to call them that, that stormwater is attenuated or slowed down in the basement. A project quite nearby, Old Mutual's office outside the Sandton Gautrain station. The stormwater was channeled into an attenuation tank in the basement and then slowly released out into the Sandton stormwater network. So that's we weren't able to use much water on either projects for irrigation.
What's the size of that tank?
Just off the top of my head, at Old Mutual, it was 25,000 litres.
Okay.
So it was a fairly big tank that sat in the basement.
Okay. Jess?
Thanks, Ludwig. Hi, Neal. Thanks
Hi,
for a good talk. I'm good, thanks for asking.
Good.
A somewhat unrelated thing, but it got me thinking about it as you started speaking about the infrastructure side of landscaping in relation to the architecture. I was curious, just for the students perhaps, there is sometimes a trend within university to almost like greenify a building by taking advantage of all roof space and placing roof gardens and growing screens and almost populating the entire structure with landscaping. I just was curious to find out what your view is around the planting of buildings and just some considerations for the students if they wish to pursue a project in that regard.
Yes, thank you. I really am, obviously I'm biased, but I really am for it. I believe that on the roofs of buildings, it can reduce the heat load on the building itself. Obviously, there's an upfront offset cost because it's a bit more expensive to design your structure to take the load. So on roofs, I really do think it plays an important role. And if you're using greening for screening, unfortunately, sometimes one's not really able to do that. To use creepers up a building and elements like that, I think it's most successful on a lower scale building, a 2-story building. You can put pots on the building to increase your height, but then you're gonna gain, a row of pots per floor to be able to get that greening to climb up the facade. So the elements can definitely work if they're planned properly and from a structural architectural point of view. And then also, if you've got a savvy landscape architect involved, it should develop well. Orientation plays a big role. North-facing plants seem to. It is a harsh climate down here in southern Africa, so plants do take a bit of a beating on the northern side, to a small degree on the western side, if they're not looked after or watered well.
Great, thanks. I'm sure that's a great help.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Kamagelo?
Yes, thank you, Ludwig. Neal, thank you so much for the lecture. I just wanted to ask, in terms of the planting, like for the trees you wanted to maintain, how did you present to the clients that you wanted to preserve it? Because I was just curious how you would explain to people that don't have your expertise the benefits of keeping vegetation around.
Okay, thanks very much for the question. Is it Kamagelo?
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I actually gave a talk on Tuesday to University of Pretoria, and just on an office practice, and I mentioned something in that talk which is quite important. We found that a lot of clients are savvy. A lot of clients are, understand your argument. If you need to retain certain planting in certain areas, they do see the value. And when it comes to existing trees, in Kimberley, we were like really trying to save every tree we could. It wasn't always possible, and through time, the trees had to unfortunately disappear for one or two reasons. But in Kimberley, there were species on campus which I personally completely dislike, but we would want to save that tree because of the shade it offers. And for clients, from a budget point of view, they're actually saving money. If they've got a tree on their site that should be retained and that is not a declared invader, they're actually saving money on the project because they don't have to plant a new one and wait 10 years for it to grow.
All right, thanks, Kamagelo. Neal, I think I'm going to conclude there, with everyone's permission. I want to thank you for taking the time to share with us some of your projects and your insights, and we're also looking forward to your further participation here at BITS, and further lectures from your side, and also studio if possible, because that is a bit of an issue that needs to be further developed also in the School of Architecture and Planning, so that I think that just enriches our take on our work and how we engage with our students as well. But thanks again, and well done on the projects, and looking forward to your future projects. Just the last announcement, the next and 13th lecture is next week, is by Nisha van der Werven, and that also starts at 10 o'clock. On display is the various session phrases and links available. I think most of you are familiar with those by now. Yes, and thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing you all next week, Monday. Goodbye.
Thanks, Ludwig, and thanks to everyone that listened, and students, good luck with your final hurdles towards the end of the year. Thanks very much for the opportunity again, Ludwig.
Pleasure. Thank you.